What's up, guys? Would you like to see me do something I'm very bad at? I am very bad at analysing hands quickly. I am known for being the slowest, most methodical, detailed hand analyzer of all time. That's right, I can make a hand review on one spot last an hour. However, in this video, I'm going to try and do it as quickly as I can, and let's see how many I get through in 20 minutes. Let's go. In this first spot, we have pocket fours in the big blind. Villain raises to 3 BBs and we decide to call. I would never be 3-betting this combo, just always calling. Queen 4 deuce in the flop, lucky enough to flop a set here. We face a 1/3 pot size c-bet, and I think this hand is pure raise. There will be some slow playing of certain sets in position. We should note that in position we don't have as much urgency to raise as we do out of position, and that's because we'll always be able to ensure that a turn bet goes in. However, this time we do decide to raise, and I think raising pure with this hand is good in practice. You'll note that I don't raise very big here. That's because I'm actually choosing this one sizing for my range, and I'm raising quite a lot of top pair and thinner hands here. Probably more than what most people would do, so I'm going for this slightly higher raise frequency strategy with a bit of a smaller sizing. Won't make a difference for fours, this is all good. Villain calls and we get the 9 of hearts on the turn. This turn merges our range, that means it makes it less polarized. The reason for that is it makes our sets and our unique value hands like 4 deuce suited deuces and 4s that we have more often than villain weaker, but it makes our draws, a lot of them turn into flushes, right? So a lot of our hands become quite good. That said, villain also makes a lot of nutty hands here, so one thing I like to do in a spot like this is drop my sizing down and just bet slightly over half pot here in position. If I was out of position, I'd actually be doing some block betting, some third pot betting in a spot like this. But this is very typical of a heart turn. You generally want to use smaller sizing. Note as well that the SPR, the stack to pot ratio, is already quite small here, so we don't have to do as much pot building. I think the size is totally fine and makes a lot of sense given that the value region of our range is now a bit less clear, it's a bit less nutty overall compared to villain's range. Villain folds here, and job done, on to the next hand. Ace 10 of spades here in the hijack, we go for an open, and villain 3-bets on the button to about 8 big blinds. We 4-bet this, no, we call this time, but 4-betting would also be completely fine. Either of these two plays is standard here. 9-8-6, this is the board we can do some donk betting on. It's important to learn when you should be leading in a 3-bet pot and when you shouldn't be. The boards that are very conducive to donk betting and good for your range are things like 9-8-6, 7-6-5, 6-5-4, 7-6-4. All of these kind of flops are really good for you because they're centered around the pocket pair density that you have when you call pre-flop. You're going to have these hands a lot more than button, who's going to have more in the vicinity of broadways and big ace king and overpairs and things like that. Villain decides to check back. We need to decide on the 9 of hearts turn whether this hand can do any leading. I think it can. I think we should understand that in an early position spot like this, the hand is going to be quite far down our range. It has some redraw. It can definitely start bluffing here. I think it can also check raise though. And I think check raising here is a play. Check folding is also a play. We checked this one out in GTO Wizard in stream here. I was doing the stream with Akshar on Friday when I played this hand, and this hand is actually not supposed to call, though calling is a very minimal EV loss, so that's to say calling is almost okay, but the showdown value is just not quite there, and that's because villain is actually allowed to start bluffing as high up as ace-jack at this spot. Again, like I said, this is a tight range configuration, so even hands like ace-jack that would normally be showdown value are going to be doing a bit of bluffing on this node. So we do decide to call this time, though the solver prefers raise and fold. I don't think it's a large error though, and if people aren't finding the bluff with ace-jack here, or ace-10, then this hand is going to be basically a bluff catcher. 5 of spades river, we check again. This is where we really need to do some studying, because it's optional for us to lead here. And I completely forgot that leading was a thing in game. So why is donk leading a thing on this river as well? It's a thing because the 5 is very good for our range. It creates some polarized value hands that we didn't have previously. Our medium hands such as 5s, 7s, this sort of thing have now become very, very strong, and we can consider building a betting range for that reason. Villain, on the other hand, is going to very gladly check back lots of hands here if given the chance, like overpairs and things like that, so having the donk bet here is good. I do, however, think that checking here does quite well in reality, because people are just going to give up this river a lot. I don't think they're going to follow through anywhere near often enough with certain bluffs. Like, I think this is a hand with the queen and jack of hearts that we can forgive villain for not bluffing, blocking ace queen and ace jack of hearts, king queen of hearts, However, I think people need to be careful that they don't accidentally never bluff this river or something. I wasn't surprised to win here. I think people show down and give up on their bluffs a lot here. So checking is undoubtedly good as well with ace 10. Had we got here with something like jack 10 though, it's very important that we bluff. Guys, I know that hand took like 4 minutes, but that is honestly the fastest I could ever go over such a complex hand. Like, I'm actually proud of that. Guys, I'm really happy, but I'm also really sad. I'm sad because this April is going to be the last chance that you have to set our live university style experience of the Carrot Poker School. After that, the school is going to be switching from a live format to a slick professional video course, which will be on sale at carrotcorner.com. This April, I'll be teaching each grade in 2 hours only. Each class will be going from 3 PM to 5 PM UK time, Monday to Friday, which is the same thing as 10 AM to 12 PM Eastern time, or 7 AM to 9 AM Pacific time. Grade 1 is going to be running from the 11th to the 15th of April, Grade 2 will run from the 18th to the 22nd, and Grade 3 will be the final week of the month from the 25th to the 29th of April. Signing up for the Carrot Poker School takes just a few button clicks. Simply head on over to carrotcorner.com and select the grade that you want to take. Or alternatively, why not set our entire full scholarship experience and save £500 while you're at it? If you're not sure which grade to take, you can always get in touch with me on Discord. Just add me there as carrots #9127. If you do sign up for the school, do the same thing, add me there, and you'll be added to our Carrot Poker Discord server and become a part of the community. Let's get back to the video. Jack 10 off here in the big blind. We can definitely mix between call and 3-bet here. I think this is mostly a call, this one, in my range charts that I use. We also sell these at carrotcorner.com. There's always time for a plug, even in a speed review, of course. So here we're going to go for a check behind. Now this is clearly not a pure action, and we are going to be betting a lot in this spot, blind versus blind, when check 2. We're going to be betting this hand most of the time and building a big bet here. And the reason that I tell students to use a big bet in float spots like this, where you're float betting the flop and it's a paired board, is that your range actually contains a lot of combos of 8x. You're going to be calling quite loosely here pre-flop due to the positions and closing the action, and therefore you're going to have a lot of hands like trip 8s in your range here. So when you build a betting range that's mostly 7x, 8x for value, you can just use a large bet. You can use like 70% pot. That's totally fine. It's important to check this hand sometimes because it's not a mandatory bet on the flop. It's not a hand that has to bet in order to maximize its EV. It's robust enough that it can wait till later. It can call turn bets, it can raise turn bets, it can do a lot of different stuff. So certainly rolling some check into your strategy here with Jack 10 is a good idea. I say rolling because you can use an RNG here to just check this hand at low frequency of the time. On the 9 of clubs turn, my opponent decides to overbet. This is an okay play. He's going to have some nutty hands here. The idea is that I'm relatively capped when I check back. While I'm not completely capped, capped is a relative term, and hands like Jack 10, 9-8, 8x in general are going to be rare guests in my range in this situation. Therefore, this overbet makes some sense. As a simplification, I would never build a raise in this spot. My range, as I say, is largely capped. His range is uncapped. He'll be checking out a position with a much stronger range than the one I have, and therefore I'm just going to be playing call only. This is a very standard way to play when your opponent is building a really polarized range and your range is much more merged or condensed. So we call. The 6 of hearts comes on the river, and villain goes for a very big overbet this time. This is a bit strange. I don't really like this play. I think that when you think about your value sizing, you should be considering what your value regions are going to want to do. So for example, if villain had a value hand like 5x here, or perhaps just an 8, he would want to use a much smaller bet than this. He would want to bet half pot, third pot, something like that. If he had a 10 here, he could consider maybe using a smaller overbet or like a B75 or something like that, meaning 75% pot. This sizing doesn't make sense with that either. And if villain has a boat, this sizing makes more sense. But if I had a boat or quad 8s here, you're going to have a hand with about 100% equity pretty much, and you should just be shoving theoretically. The reason that villain should shove with a boat here is that when he bets this sizing, he effectively never gets raised. And if you're not going to get raised, you actually maximize your EV by going even bigger. So something like 7s here should jam. Something like 10x, 5x, or 8x should go smaller. This is what I would consider a no man's land sizing. I don't really like this. I don't think this maximizes EV for any of its value range, and therefore I don't think it should be used as a bluff either. Our straight here can't be raised. Clearly we're losing to the value region of boats here and only chopping with Jack 10. There's absolutely no value in raising this spot at all, we have essentially a bluff catcher, but a very good one, and villain shows up with the queen jack and we scoop a nice pot. Next hand we have pocket queens. We go for a 3-bet here and we get a flop of 8-7-5 small blind against hijack. If you remember what I said about this situation a few minutes ago, we want to be leading here when we are the pre-flop caller out of position, right? So the pre-flop caller of the 3-bet really likes these sorts of flop, especially rainbow, because when a flop is rainbow, it really preserves the strength of the rank of your hand, like the 8-7-6 aspect, the sets, the straights, whatever it may be. That would be kind of negated if it was all the same suit, right? But in that situation, the out of position player wants to do a lot of leading. So if he wants to do a lot of betting on this flop, then this is kind of like push and pull. That means that our range wants to do a lot of checking. So we check here with queens. Villain bets very tiny. Now this is a regular, this player. And this bet is a little bit weird. I think at the stack depth, he probably wants to increase sizing with his sets and just build a bigger pot. And so I think at 100 BB stack depth, where urgency is lower, where he doesn't have to rush getting value so much, this is probably a reasonable bet size. But I think with deeper stacks, I don't really like this again. And I think with queens, this is probably the pair that we should be doing the most raising with. Aces and kings are less vulnerable than queens. They gain less from getting fold equity. Meanwhile, jacks, tens, and nines are just simply weaker hands that are not as thick for value. Therefore, I think queens is that sweet spot in our range, that threshold that practically always raises against the sizing. It could be that slow playing is okay here, but when I don't know if a line is okay, I tend to take the line that I know is fine. And I have no doubt that raising is fine here. Note that my sizing is not huge. I don't want to make this an overbet or even anywhere near pot, and the reason for that is that I'm raising quite thinly here with respect to what my opponent's range actually is. I'm raising hands like kings, aces, queens, jacks for the most part for value. Again, I'll have bluffs as well, but that's not so important for my sizing. And villain will be all over this with hands like sets sometimes. Therefore, I need to make sure that I'm not building a sizing that not isolates me fully against sets, but starts to isolate me too strongly against higher equity hands than my own. Villain does fold here, I think, and we take down this pot, yeah. Jack 4 now in the big blind. We 3-bet this time. This hand is going to be one of our really frequent bluffs. The villain makes the call. On queen 9-5, I'm going to be a little bit selective here. I don't think this board is fantastic for a polarized big blind 3-bet range. I will, however, be doing some c-betting. I think without a backdoor here with just Jack 4, this makes quite a dicey c-bet. I decide to check this time. I think it's probably okay to c-bet here, but I'm not 100% sure. I think the c-bet frequency overall here won't be super high on this board, and certain hands like this one with nothing are going to have to be a bit more careful. The ace turn is also not fantastic for me when I'm big blind. This is a much better turn for my range when I'm the small blind. I think bluffing very weak hands like this that have absolutely nothing going for them can be fine in a lot of spots in theory. However, it's not so fine in spots where our range is doing badly. And I think being out of position with this range here, we're not doing amazingly, and so checking this hand seems good. Villain checks back, and now that we reach the 5 river, I think it's important here to be bluffing with our lower equity hands, like our Jack X and 10X, that will be unblocking villain's king high, that can fold here, unblocking his low to medium pairs like 6s, 7s, and 8s that can fold here. The Jack and the 4 seem like really good cards here to bet. They seem to block some Queen Jack combos, some Ace Jack combos, some Ace 4 combos. Meanwhile, unblocking that whole region I talked about, 10s, 8s, 7s, 6s, 4s. Okay, we block a bit of 4s, but that's about it. And so I think bluffing this hand is pretty mandatory. Now, what I do in this spot is I alternate between a few different sizes. So to understand this, let's think about my value range. If I had a hand like Ace X, I would actually go for a fairly large bet here, maybe something like 75% pot. If I had a very good ace, something like Ace Queen, Ace 5, maybe something like pocket 9s that I'd slow played for a couple of streets, which is definitely fine, then I would go for an overbet like this. And if I had a hand like King, Queen, Queen Jack, Queen 10, pocket kings, I could go for a block bet. So I actually have 3 different sizes here in my strategy, and I rolled really low here, which is aggressive for me, so I used the bigger size this time, and villain folded. King 10 of diamonds now in the cutoff. We go for a small open, and we get 3-bet from the small blind. We make the call, and the flop comes 7 deuce deuce. When your opponent makes a small c-bet like this, you want to practically never be folding your range in position after calling a 3-bet, because you have a lot of things going in your favor here. One, this is not a super high equity board for villain's range. While he does have a big nut advantage here, our range is still entitled to a lot of the pot because of the frequency that we have pocket pairs like 9s, 8s, 7s, that's a boat, 6s, 5s, 10s, all of this stuff. While it's in both ranges, it's more concentrated in our range than it is in his range, because his range is diluted by lots of big rubbish cards like King Jack off and Queen 10 suited. The 10 of spades comes on the turn, villain checks, and we actually miss a pure bet here. We looked this one up later in GTO Wizard and we saw that this one was a pure bet. That said, it's not a big EV loss to check, and this really comes down to how often you think your opponent is check raising and what range he's going to check raise with. It also depends on how capped you think his turn checking range is. I would say in general, against more straightforward and recreational player types, you should just go for a bet here when you have this hand every single time. Against trickier regs who are going to maybe overbluff the river if you check back, or maybe do a lot of jamming, it may be better to check behind here. So while the solver prefers betting here, it's not by much EV, and this is the spot that can swing very quickly depending on what your opponents are doing. We get the 9 of hearts river here, and villain goes for another check. By this point in the hand, it's very clear that we have the best hand the vast majority of the time. Our equity here is probably upwards of 80%, meaning that we can go for a larger bet. Usually if you have 80 to 85% equity, you can bet something like this, which is 75% of the pot. Villain folds, and we win a nice pot. Ace king of hearts, we go for an open in the hijack, and villain makes the call. Flop comes king, queen, 7, two-tone. Villain checks, and we decide to make a large c-bet this time. I'm building a big c-bet on this board because I have a relatively clear nut advantage here, and my value region is pretty happy to build a big pot right from the get-go. Villain calls, and we get the 6 of diamonds on the turn. This is a classic overbet spot. You will have 3 types of hand here. With respect to your made hands, you will have hands that are too weak to value bet. You'll have hands that are strong enough to value bet but shouldn't do it every single time. And then you'll have hands that are actually clear value bets and they have to value bet every single time. Of those 3 categories, I think this is definitely the latter. It's a mandatory value bet. It's too high an equity hand to ever consider slow playing, because most crucially here, we are in position, meaning that if we check, we do not give our opponent the chance to bet on this street. We would go straight to the river, and that would lead to the pot stagnating. We decide to overbet here, which is our only sizing in our toolkit. This is very standard in spots where your value range is extremely powerful. Villain's range, on the other hand, is capped, and that's what you're looking for when you're considering overbetting on the turn. The 5 of diamonds comes on the river. This looks like it could be a value bet again, however, in game I suspected this was just a pure check. The reason I don't think you can bet again here is that when you've already gone for a big bet on the flop and then an overbet on the turn, what you're actually doing is filtering your opponent's range to some pretty strong hands already. We are an equity favourite here on this decision point, like we do have the best hand most of the time, but it's important to understand that that is not sufficient for value betting. In order to value bet, you want to think that your equity after your opponent continues to your bet is still solid and is clearly above 50%. It can't just be 51% due to rake and due to the fact that your opponent will raise sometimes, decimating your EV even when you have the best hand. Therefore, with ace king here, I decide to check behind. Good thing we did, because we run into the 3-4 that just meekly check called the turn and made a straight on the river. I think villain's play is a little bit questionable here, but with this much equity it might be okay to make this turn call. I suspect it's better for him to maybe play some shoves with this hand. I don't think it can fold, but it's a very awkward spot to be in and you wouldn't want to be shoving very often here. I think my play is fine. We looked this up later in the solver and it agreed that it was just a bit too thin to value bet this river after a big bet and then an overbet. Had I bet smaller on the flop and the turn, I would be able to value bet this river. Jack 7 of clubs now in the big blind. Villain makes an open, we get a call, and we decide to come along. I think it's important to flat here with a weaker player in the small blind. A lot of your edge and win rate just comes from playing pots with these opponents. The flop comes ace, king 5, two-tone. Checks to us, we check. Villain checks, and the turn comes to 6 of diamonds. It's important not to do anything in nodes like this if check to. Here villain leads, so we're going away anyway, but we want to have fairly high standards out of position with a range disadvantage in a multi-way pot for what we're leading, and we can pretty safely form the rule that we need some kind of draw to lead this turn, though I'd be very wary of such a rule in other spots, because such a rule could prove to be overly pessimistic in heads-up pots when your range is doing better. Ace-Jack now in the big blind, 3x open from under the gun. This is close in theory, but there's another read going on here. People who 3x in today's Modern games are typically going to be weaker players. Again, against a recreational player, you can expect that some of your EV will come from skill edge, and therefore you have an extra boost here. You want to make this call. 10-3 deuce, villain makes a small c-bet, and I think this hand is a fold against under the gun, but continue against a later position. 10's now in the big blind, open from hijack, and we make the call. We will be mixing some 3-bet in here, but it's mostly going to be call in these positions. 6-6-4, another board we want to do a lot of leading on. The rainbow paired boards are extremely good for your range when you're against an early position opener especially. And this is because villain's range is going to be weighted away from small cards. Meanwhile, you will have a very big 6-6 advantage here, a nut advantage here, and if you check here with all of your range, the correct solver strategy is actually to check back with everything in the hijack. I don't want to allow for that possibility, therefore I am building a leading range in the spot. I go for it this time with 10s. I could also check here, but I think doing a ton of leading here is good. Villain makes the call, the 8 comes on the turn. Now my sizing is going to be a bit bigger, probably because I'm going to be betting less of my mediocre hands now and more just sort of 8x plus hands for value. I decide to bet, okay, I go small again here. I think that's also fine. I can maybe actually have 2 sizes in this spot and go for block bets and over bets. My time is up. Fortunately, that's the end of the hand as my opponent folds. I don't think that was a bad effort, guys, not at all. 10 hands in 20 minutes, that's about as well as I've ever done trying to analyze hands quickly. Hope you guys enjoyed this fast and furious hand review format. If you like the way that I talk about poker, do check out all of my coaching and teaching services over at carrotcorner.com. If you want to get in touch with me or you're interested in enrolling for the April school, which I showed you some info about earlier, then you can always head over to carrotcorner.com to sign up, or even add me on Discord as carrots #9127, and we can talk more about which course would be right for you. Thank you guys, hope you enjoyed, and see you on the next video. Good luck at the tables, and bye for now.